It's not uncommon for bands to remix, remaster, and re-release albums that they did years ago. They'll usually hype how it sounds so much better, and it's clearer, and it's closer to their original vision, things like that. They'll get some album sales, then they'll move on to the next album. But Muse has really been pushing just how different their re-release of Origin of Symmetry is. I'm Tim Oates on bass, and we're going to dive into track-by-track analysis of the original versus the remixed, remastered Origin of Symmetry. Okay, Origin of Symmetry was originally released on June 18th, 2001, and the re-release was exactly 20 years later. Now, one thing to note is, in the US, it actually wasn't released until 2005. There was some issues with the label. They wanted Matt Bellamy to pull back on some of the falsetto. They left the label, went to a different... it's a whole thing. I'm going to go through each song. I'm going to listen to the original, then I'm going to listen immediately to the remixed, remastered version. When you see a title card, feel free to pause the video if you'd like to check out the song yourself before hearing my thoughts. It'll be like we're going through this together. First up is Newborn. Now, this is definitely a very popular song. You can definitely hear a difference out of the gate. The piano is much clearer. It's much more pronounced in the intro. The bass sounds like it's probably EQ'd a little different. Might even have some more compression on it, which is good. It makes the bass punch a little bit more. The verse, in my opinion, is really where the changes stand out. There's a lot of layers in the verse that in the original you don't hear that much. You kind of subtle, like they're there, but like they're so buried in the mix that you don't really know what they're doing necessarily. In the remix version, they really stand out. They're not overpowering, but they bring them up. They play with the panning work, which is kind of nice. Now, the chorus is much more minimal in the changes. The chorus already sounded pretty good. This one's just kind of the general, like, effect that you would get from a remix and remaster. And the last thing I noticed is that the vocals are definitely cleaned up more in the new version. In the old one, you could hear more breaths. You could hear some little pops. Things like that. Nothing stood out in the new version. It really feels like that was kind of cleaned up, which is nice to hear, because sometimes that stuff can be distracting. Let's move right into Bliss, which is another popular song off the album, and was actually their closing song for most of the tour when they were promoting Origin of Symmetry. Now, listening to the original, I could definitely hear a couple things that I wanted changed. There was kind of a lack of fullness in the bass, and I thought the synths could come up a little bit. Now, the synth is definitely up. Listening to the newer version, the bass is probably a little bit fuller, but not much. If anything, I'd say the bass drum is probably a little bit more pronounced, and that, my guess is that's going to be the way it is through the whole album. There's more panning work here, more movement like around your head when you're listening under cans, and I'd say probably the part that punches the most is the bridge. That one definitely stood out to me. But this is also a song that they did state up front, hey, didn't have to make a lot of changes to. There wasn't a lot that they needed to do here. So it's not surprising that this one doesn't have a ton that's different, but it is different. It definitely sounds bigger in general. And really, all the songs should sound bigger, just by the nature of, remixing, remastering. Space Dementia is next up, and this is one that they actually pushed a lot, saying they were able to really make some big changes in. And they were right. I mean, out of the gate, the intro just has such a different feel. The piano in the original sounded kind of thin and wispy, and here's the thing. On hearing it before, I never would have thought that, but now hearing what it could be, it's just night and day difference. You can really hear the resonance of each note. In fact, there's actually one note that's kind of wobbly. I think hearing that stuff come out in the mix just gives it that much more personality, gives it that much more authenticity. The strings make such a difference in this song. I mean, they were talking about that in their social media, but it really does make such a difference. There were strings in the original, but they were so buried, like they were almost pointless. But the way that addition to the mix just really pulled out something so much more. And the outro actually hits a lot harder as well. I mean, the outro, it's kind of like these like space noises and kind of a wind down, but you can actually hear a lot more detail in these, space sounds, for lack of a better term. That one was pretty noticeable in the differences, in a good way. But let's move right into the next track, Hyper Music, which was actually released as a double A-side single with Feeling Good. This one sounded so good. The guitar was so much crisper. I mean, really, really made it pop, made it stand out, and just added that much more to the song. Another thing that I thought popped a little bit more was the backing vocals, which you could hear in the original, but definitely seemed to be a little bit more important in the remix. The chorus in this one, definitely heavier. And the second verse feels a little different. It kind of feels tighter. And that tightness helps to get the heaviness and the extra punchiness that they're looking for through. Now the next one is Plugin Baby, which they did state up front, similar to Bliss, that there probably wasn't as much they could do here. And while they're right, I actually think that the subtle changes make a huge difference. The bass drum is really adding a lot. The keys were brought up. I think that adds a lot to it, even though it's a subtle change. I actually think that the vocals seem to drop more, or perhaps they left the vocals where they are because everything else was kind of brought up. But relative in the mix, I think that actually came down, but they EQ'd it a lot more. What this does is it kind of takes a little bit of the harshness out of the vocals. And you might never have thought that the vocals were harsh, and it's not about it sounding harsh to you, but when you hear it side by side, you can kind of go, oh, okay, like it's cleaned up a little bit. It's not quite as harsh. And you can really notice in the falsettos at the end. What's really interesting about the falsettos is the delay in the US release originally was because the label they were on wanted Matt Bellamy to redo some of the songs, including this one, specifically to tone down the falsettos. Now the next song, Citizen Erased, it almost sounds like they re-recorded it. I know they didn't, but they put a lot of effort into this song. In the beginning, the synth bass, they really were able to take the pinginess out of it. Now it kind of sounds more bass than synth. The synth is still there, but it just changes the dynamic of that section so much. The guitar sounds completely different. The guitar line that comes in, I think about 2 minutes, 15 seconds, somewhere around there. I literally screamed, holy crap, when I heard this, because it sounds that much different. The biggest thing were the strings at the end. Oh, such a difference. Such a huge difference. And they've been talking about this on their social media. They're not wrong. Now, the one that they probably have been talking about the most, though, is this next song, which is Microcuts. And I will say out of the gate, the harpsichord really does add a lot. I don't know that the entire song is kind of mind-blowingly different, but it is very different. The vocals on this version, so much more clear. They're haunting the way that they've been processed. Kind of changes the feel of the song and the way that you interpret it. The guitar cuts through way better. They actually got rid of the panning effect at the end of the song. That had to have been a very deliberate decision. That must have been maybe something they didn't like from the original that they wanted to get rid of with the remix. And that's an important thing to know, is that sometimes remixes and remasterings isn't about adding, but it's about correcting too. Let's move right into the next song, just Screenager. Now this song I thought sounded really good with the remix and the remastering, but I didn't find there to be kind of a standout part. It's kind of everything. It's all the work they've been doing in the album. You know, everything's a little bit louder, a little bit clearer. You can hear the layers better. I mean, it's literally everything else that I've been saying. So with that said, we'll just move right into Darkshines. Similarly to Screenager, a lot of what we've already talked about is in Darkshines as well. There are a couple of more noticeable differences though. The bass, I feel like they really put a lot of focus into it, which I love. I think the bass sounds great. I think it adds a ton. And I'd say in general, the back half of the song, it just feels so much more clearer and precise. But a lot of the stuff is what we've already talked about, so I don't want to dwell on it too much. I am really excited about the next song though, because Feeling Good has been covered, you know, a million times by different artists, but Muse's version is hands down my favorite version of this track. And I wasn't sure how much more they could do, but they definitely added a lot. This is another track that has a surprising impact from the addition of the strings. There was a lot that they changed here, and here's actually the thing is I wasn't sure which version I liked better. There's definitely a lot I liked in the remix better, but there was actually something about like the little bit more raw and kind of grittiness of the original mix that also appealed to me. But at the end of the song, whatever they did to that snare just pulled me back in. I was like, you know what? I'm an idiot. This is so much better. It sounds absolutely amazing. I know it might sound ridiculous that like a couple of snare hits at the end of the song can make or break a song. It absolutely can. It's such a good way to end the song. It sounds so great. Now, the next track was actually only released on the Japanese version originally, but it's now included in the remix. So this is, of course, Futurism. Now, the new mix opens the song up quite a bit. The vocals in this version sound absolutely amazing. This is another one where I almost wonder if they brought the level of the vocals down compared to everything else, but put a lot of work into the processing of the vocals, the EQing, a little bit of effects, things like that, because the vocals really do sound that much better. I think this remix sounds so good that it almost makes the original sound like a demo. Like, to me, it actually takes away from the original just because of how big of a difference there is. We're already at the end of the album. Literally, there's only one song left, which is Megalomania. And Matt Bellamy actually said that he believes this song is the one that was changed the most with the remix. And there's definitely a number of changes. The synths in the beginning are really much fuller. There's a lot more layers than you can originally hear. The organ's actually brought up in the mix in the new version, but I found it to be less overpowering. That has to do with, you know, the relative volume to everything else, the EQing of all of the different instruments, things like that. But I think it actually helped a lot. They brought up the strings. So there's another song that had a lot of strings that were buried in the original one. Sounds great. I did notice there were some vocal pops. There's a lot of P sounds in this track, and with those you tend to get a lot of pop, pop, pop. You get the pops off the P, and they were able to remove some of those, clear up the vocals. That always helps. So that's it. That's all 12 tracks. All of the hype on their social media and everything they've been pushing about the work put into the remixed album, I think it's absolutely true. They did not disappoint. What did you think was really a standout moment on the album? I've shared all my thoughts. I want to know what you think. Like, drop in the comments what parts really took you by surprise or really stood out and kind of pulled you in. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Make sure to ring the bell. That's how you get notified of new videos just like this one. You at home, keep making beautiful music, and I will see you in the next one.